If you're looking to start a retro video game collection, do not come to New York to buy your games. And this mainly applies to New York City and the surrounding boroughs, basically the New York metro area. I've been game hunting for years, and I've bought video games all across the country, from New York on the East Coast to the Midwest, and even on the West Coast when I was living in California. I've been able to see different markets, see how people interact in the different areas and spaces where video games are bought and sold. And no place has been more difficult, more arduous to buy video games than New York City. And this isn't anything new. This is the way it's been for quite some time. Now, a lot of people recognize the West Coast as probably the best region of the country to buy video games. And there are reasons for that, but we're going to talk about the 3 reasons why I specifically feel like New York is not the best place to buy video games. And we'll start with the first reason, which is obviously going to be price. New York City is one of the most expensive places to live on the planet, outside of video games. When you think about the cost of living, housing expenses, insurance, food, recreational activities, there is an NYC premium on any and everything that's done in New York City. And retro video games and the hobby of collecting retro video games is already an expensive hobby in and of itself. And so when you live in a city that's filled with individuals who pretty much live and die on what we call a hustle, New York has a very strong hustle culture, meaning that there are millions of individuals who are constantly looking for ways to make a dollar, which means they're constantly looking to flip items, scalp items, do whatever it is that they got to do to make a buck. And that hustle culture and that hustle mentality filtered its way into retro video games and video game collecting in general years ago. So what that means is that when you walk into most mom and pop shops, which is what you'll primarily see in New York. New York is still one of those places that has a lot of those mom and pop shops. We don't have a lot of, like, we do have the big chain stores. We do have the Targets, the Walmarts, the Best Buys, but we have a lot of the mom and pop shops. And what you'll see when you walk into those places, our prices are pretty much higher than anywhere else you'll see video games. Now, I've watched a number of YouTube videos where YouTubers who are not native to New York come to New York to try and game hunt, and they're blown away by the prices that they see when they walk into some of the video game stores that they may visit in Manhattan, Yonkers, Brooklyn, Long Island. It's pretty much a sticker shock that they don't see in any other part of the country that they go to. And a lot of that has to do with overhead. If you own a brick and mortar store in a place like New York, odds are your rent is higher, your property taxes are higher, and your utility bills are higher. And therefore that gets reflected in the cost of the products that you're selling. On top of that, there's this almost underlying understanding that New Yorkers earn more, so they're expected to pay more. And to a large part, a lot of New Yorkers do accept this. But when it comes to the hobby of video games, that's one hobby where we're constantly looking at prices, and we're constantly comparing, not only from what we see in other areas, but also from what we see online. And when we have something like a price charting, which kind of gives us somewhat of a baseline as to what we should be paying for retro video games, it becomes difficult to swallow the inflated prices that we see in retro game stores. On top of the fact that overhead is expensive, it's difficult to source games in New York, which also leads to higher prices because you'll rarely find certain types of games in abundance at a retro game store in New York. And that leads me to the second reason why New York is not the place to go if you're trying to build a retro collection. And that is competition. As I mentioned earlier, New York has a strong hustle culture. If there's anywhere, any arena, any place that you can make a quick dollar, you better believe that people are going to find out about it and they're going to do everything in their power to exploit it. And this is what you've seen happen, and you've been seeing it happen in the hobby of retro game collecting for years now. It has reached a fever pitch, an all-time high here in New York, where the competition for buying, sourcing, and collecting retro video games is at a ridiculous level. No matter where you go, no matter where you're at, you better believe that if it's a place that people know retro games are often in abundance, there are going to be people literally ready to fight you for an opportunity to purchase retro video games at a decent price. And what we've seen is that because the ability to source has become even more scarce, you're seeing that competition level increase even more. New York City and the surrounding areas, it's not like other parts of the country where you'll have a lot of mom and pop retro game stores. In fact, we do have a decent amount, but what you'll see at a lot of these retro game stores are a lot of the same games. You'll see a lot of the same types of games. There's not a lot of variety, and you don't see a lot of the uncommon consoles and video games for those consoles. So for instance, in most stores, you're going to see Wii U, basic PlayStation 1 games, basic PlayStation 2 games, common GameCube games, but you're not really going to see a lot of Sega Saturn, Sega CD, TurboGrafx, Jaguar, Virtua Boy, and the list goes on. I could go on for a while about the different consoles that we just don't see. So when those items do pop up, it is a feeding frenzy. On top of that, a lot of the thrift stores and I would say bargain shops that used to carry retro video games, the store owners themselves, even when it comes to thrift stores, mainline thrift stores, they've become hip to the fact that retro game prices are higher. And so what they've done is they've gone in and increased the prices of retro games everywhere. So New York is no longer a place where you're able to walk into a thrift store and find a deal, because the thrift stores have now increased the prices to match what you would see on a price charting. Part of me feels like they've done this to kind of quench the high levels of competition that they see in store. Because when I say that there's competition in store, I mean there's literally physical competition in stores in New York, both in thrift stores, mom and pop shops, and even at certain yard sales. The level of competition is fierce, and it just creates a very difficult atmosphere to buy games. New York, unfortunately, is not one of those places that has yard sales. We don't have a lot of flea markets. The flea market, the traditional flea market, is something that I think is more of a West Coast thing. You will see more open air flea markets on the West Coast. They're more common there. And there's usually a lot better quality when you go to those open air flea markets on the West Coast and even in the Midwest. Honestly, even when you cross the bridge, the George Washington, and go to New Jersey, your chances of seeing a flea market exponentially increases, because flea markets just are not that prevalent in New York City. Our geographical structure, the infrastructure of our city, the way the blocks are built, the way the neighborhoods are constructed, they're not constructed in a way that facilitates flea market type of shopping. It's just not something that we've really seen here. Back in the 90s, there used to be places where you could go and set up as a vendor, but they were indoors and they were controlled by either the main landlord or something like that. We had a few of those, but we don't typically have a lot of type of flea market activity going on. On top of that, because New York is an East Coast city and we have the 4 seasons, about 6 months out of the year, it's not seasonable for us to have yard sales or open air events where folks can come in and purchase video games and have that type of communal, shopping experience where you've got people bringing items from their home and stuff like that. We're just not set up that way. So we rely heavily on brick and mortar stores, mom and pop shops, thrift shops, and retro game stores. And so all these factors combined just create a high level of competition in the area, which can sometimes be a turnoff, especially if you're not trying to purchase video games to resell them. If you're just trying to casually build a collection, it can be very off-putting if your first retro game buying experience is met with someone who looks like they drank way too much coffee or did something else, and they look like a fiend trying to get games. It's just not the best experience. The last reason why I would say New York is not the place to go for building your retro gaming collection is going to be selection. And I touched on this before, but what I've seen in a lot of game stores in New York is a lot of the same types of games. You will see a lot of the same types of games for the same systems, and a lot of stores just selling the same thing. Now, if you do happen to go into a store that has something different, that has Neo Geo games, that has, just something off the cuff, even Dreamcast, even though Dreamcast isn't extremely rare or anything, but even something like Dreamcast games, if you do happen to find a store with that type of product, they're going to know that they've got something rare, and then it's going to go back to the pricing where those items will be priced crazy. 10, 15, 25. I've even seen 50% more than what you would pay even online. In fact, there are some stores when you start getting into the Yonkers area that will have games priced at 200% of what they go for, either on price charting or on eBay. And a lot of times those store owners will feel justified. It's almost like some game stores in New York, when it comes to their higher price games, it seems like they're more interested in displaying them in their stores than actually selling them to customers, because they've got them priced so high that the same game has been sitting behind the glass case for years. And you begin to scratch your head and wonder, is the goal here to sell this game or just to display this game? And it's at that level in New York where if you do run into a store with quality games, it doesn't seem like they're as interested in selling it as they are just showing it, which then makes you wonder what's the point of it all. And that can just become very difficult for anyone who's looking to build a collection, add to a collection, or just really just jump off into this amazing hobby that is retro game collecting. Now, as a New Yorker, I definitely understand the importance of being frugal, of being cost conscious, of collecting as many dollars as you can, because it is expensive here. Living out here, when you own a home out here, it becomes very, very expensive. However, it also makes you as the consumer it forces you in a position where you have to explore other options to purchase retro games. Now, I'm not saying that California, Portland, the Midwest, I'm not saying that those places are, the best places on the planet and they don't have their issues. And I'm also not saying that New York is all bad. There are some good things about, the retro collecting community here in New York. I think that when you do link up with other enthusiasts, it can be a really good time, especially sharing ideas and sharing tips and, putting each other on, individually. But when it comes to the consumer experience at a retail level, whether it be at a thrift shop, pawn store, anything like that, you're going to have a very difficult time here on the East Coast. But I could be dead wrong. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I've been collecting out here for quite some time. I've gone to a number of retro game stores. I've gone to a few gaming conventions, and I'm definitely seeing where it is a bit challenging to collect on the East Coast. And I think if you've got funds and if you want to start collecting, maybe you want to start right outside New York. Maybe you want to go to Pennsylvania. Maybe you want to start in Connecticut. Maybe you want to, and this is all just from a pricing perspective, and an ease of purchase perspective. There's just a lot of easier options and easier ways that you can get into the hobby. But let me know what you think down in the comments. If you've ever visited New York, if you've ever tried game hunting in New York, if you're a New York native, or if you're someone who's just ever wondered about what game hunting is like on the East Coast, let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments, and I will catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.